Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. Making this podcast I've written 500 short stories. These are maybe an hour's worth of ones related to relationships. This first one is about a late relationship. The story is called Knitting. After he got laid off at age 70, he tried to find work but could get no better than a part-time minimum wage job as a library page. Despite years of psychotherapy, meditation, mindfulness, and so on, he found the only way to keep his anxiety under control was to stay busy, distracting attention from his real and imagined woes. He was never an athlete and had no desire to, for example, take up golf, that staging area for the hereafter, nor did he want to attend activities at the senior center that would to acknowledge his place on life's conveyor belt. Watch more TV? He saw it as a waste of time. He liked to be productive, but at what? He never was arsey, so other cliches were out, for example, the old man at his easel or wandering around with an outsized zoom lens, creating the zillionth image of nature's eye candy. He flashed on his mother knitting a sweater. Too hard, too feminine. Can you just see me in a knitting circle? So he dismissed the idea. But knitting kept intruding. It's too hard. I'm retarded at visualizing. Maybe if it was just a scarf, that's just a rectangle, no changed angles. Maybe I should watch a YouTube video. And he did, but couldn't get even the basic knit and purl move. If I took a knitting class, it would be embarrassing, not just being a man, but I'd be so bad at it. Should I hire a tutor? I'm sure some little old lady would come to my house. No, we'd have to meet in a park bench. She might think I'm a rapist or something. He thought about placing an ad for a tutor on Craigslist, but figured that little old ladies who knit are more likely to see a note hung on some yarn store's bulletin board, if they have bulletin boards. Thorough, he went to 3 knitting stores. 2 did have bulletin boards, and the other allowed him to tape his note to the cash register counter. Not so old man, inept with crafty things, wants to see if he can learn to knit. Seeking a patient tutor. 510-122-2376. He returned home to find a message on his answering machine. Yes, he still used an answering machine. Not because he didn't understand how to set up voicemail, but because he liked to screen calls. The message? Hello, I'm Marty Atkinson, the owner of A Good Yarn, who phoned me to say that you were looking for someone to show you how to knit. You're welcome to come to my apartment. He thought, well, there are 4 widows for every widower. Maybe she's eager. Feminist assertiveness has reached the senior set. So he went to Marty's apartment, where he saw why she was so forward. She's bedridden with MS. He was slow to pick up even basic knitting moves, but Marty was indeed patient. In showing him increasingly, she seemed to hold his hand just a fraction of a second longer than required. And then one time, she held it for a full second. He looked her in the eye, then, reminded he was on her bed, turned away. Until once, he didn't. And he and Marty met weekly for knitting lessons. Before long, he had made 6 scarves and sewed a label in each, Made with Love, by Albert and Marty. Anyway, that story is called Knitting. The next story is written as a children's story, but it's really for adults. The story is called Venus and Iris. It's one of my very favorites. Deep in the bog, with the cicadas singing, there was a flytrap named Venus. He was just old enough to start noticing things like that he had red traps. He thought they were ugly and wished they were green like the rest of them. He also noticed things outside himself. He looked to the left, just some fly traps and some brush. He looked to the right, just some fly traps and some peat. He looked ahead, just some fly traps and lots of bog. But then he looked behind, and there was an iris. She was beautiful, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. It's hard for fly traps to talk, especially young ones, but he summoned all his energy and croaked, "Hi." Iris stared at Venus's traps, and even though they were small, those teeth! She got scared and so looked away. Embarrassed and sad, he turned away too. Days passed, and every so often an insect would fall into Venus's trap, and as soon as it touched two of the trap's trigger hairs, the trap slammed shut. Well, a growing boy has to eat. And the boy grew bigger. Every so often he would look at Iris, but the bigger he got, the scarier he looked, and the faster she turned away. So he did too. Then one day there was loud buzzing. Beetles! He looked at Iris. She was covered with beetles. They were eating her. Venus widened his traps and squeezed really hard, so lots of the glistening, attractive dew sat on his traps. And it worked. A beetle jumped off Iris and right onto his trap. Snap! Dinner is served. Even though fly traps find it very hard to speak, love makes almost anything possible. So he tried to speak, but alas, all that came out was digested beetle. He tried again. More digested beetle. He tried yet again, and finally words came out. Please help me save my Iris. But the fly traps didn't move. Please, he cried. The fly traps remained still. He screamed, I love her more than life itself. And that moved the fly traps. Suddenly most of them squeezed as hard as they could. Their traps opened as wide as they could, covered with that glistening, attractive dew. And like a magnet, the beetles jumped into the traps. Well, most of them. One beetle was still left on the now very wilted Iris. Now what? Venus couldn't eat the beetle himself. He had just eaten one and remembered what his mother had warned him. Eat more than one a day and you'll die. But Venus looked at Iris and knew what he had to do. He squeezed harder than he ever had in his entire life. Then he squeezed some more. And all his traps opened the widest they'd ever been. Even wider than you do when the doctor tells you to say, ah. And all his traps were covered with that glistening, attractive dew. And just like that, the last beetle jumped from Iris and into his trap. Snap. Venus looked at Iris, and he was happy. And this time she did not look away. She leaned toward him, and Venus was happy. But then Venus felt sick, and he wondered, should I have eaten that beetle? The boy's red traps turned green, a sickly green. If you were Venus, would you have eaten that beetle? Iris knew that if she used her body to shield Venus from the sun for a day, he would live, but she, who can only live in shade, would likely die. If you were Iris, what would you do? Lessons, of course, no matter how much should we sacrifice for love? Does lookism affect how much we're willing to do for others? Are there different expectations for males versus females? Anyway, that story is called Venus and Iris. The next story is called Ikebana Circle. Ikebana is the Japanese art of flower arranging. It integrates earth at the bottom, humans in the middle, or human in the middle, and sky at the top. Often it is framed by a circle. Lily's husband died at a good age, 86, and after the appropriate period of mourning, she decided that while still able, she would have an adventure. After all, her whole adult life, she was an Ikebana flower arranger, a life beautiful but free of adventure. So Lily took her modest inheritance and flew to San Francisco, where she knew a cafe waitress who had immigrated from her town and agreed to sponsor Lily, guaranteeing her a job. Lily started as a dishwasher and of course didn't like it as much as Ikebana, but accepted that she needed to start somewhere, and soon she was promoted to busser, setting tables, pouring coffee, cleaning tables. At night, Lily made Ikebana, which she sold to restaurants. She did it not just for the money, although she certainly could use it with the exorbitant cost of living even in bad areas in the San Francisco Bay Area. But it was spiritually renewing. Often, Lily would bring an Ikebana to the cafe and put it on a table of a customer that she liked. Her favorite customer was an old, quiet man, simply dressed. When she put the Ikebana on his table for the second time, he asked if she would like to take a walk with him sometime. Nervous, she just mumbled thank you and scurried off with her coffee pot. But the next time he came in, she said, I would be honored to walk with you. Soon he invited her to his modest home. But after she agreed to move in with him, he said that he was a retired venture capitalist. She didn't know what that was, so he explained that his job was to find money for tiny businesses that promised to make the world better. They enjoyed the early December of their years, indeed honestly loved each other, even though sex for them could not go beyond kissing, cuddling, and fondling. And then he got Parkinson's disease. She not only didn't resent caring for him, she loved it, until the end, which wasn't as pleasant as her husband's, who had died peacefully in his sleep. He left all his $26 million to her. She returned to Japan to live in her simple apartment, and spent the rest of her life driving into the country, giving rural high school computer teachers in Ikebana. Inside its circle was a sky represented by a cherry blossom branch, a person by shiny leaves, and on its earth, 25 million yen, $200,000. All she said to the teachers was, give it to a student who could make the world better. That story is called The Ikebana Circle. This next story is, Do You Take This? Paula and Justin met on Coffee Meets Bagel, attracted to each other by shared interests, both having middle-class jobs, both liking to think things through, and most of all, finding each other attractive, but not so attractive as to be endlessly hit on. After the requisite first checkout over coffee, there was the movie date, the dinner date, then the dinner plus dessert date. A few months later, they moved in together and soon decided to marry. There was no drama, such as one person wanting to tie the knot, the other unsure. They were at the age when the peer and parental pressure, plus a desire to finally be grown-ups and have kids, all sprinkled with pixie dust, made Paula and Justin's decision easy. Although neither Paula nor Justin were religious, they knew that at least some invitees would prefer a church wedding, while even the atheists would just shrug. So, First Lutheran Church it was. After all, Pastor Christine had baptized Paula. So there were Paula and Justin at the moment of truth, the vows. The pastor didn't make the mistake of rushing through them. She allowed plenty time for the couple to let each of those time-honored phrases fully soak in. And indeed, both Paula and Justin, consistent with their liking to think things through, reflected on each phrase. Do you, Paula Whitney, take Justin Novak to have and hold from this day forward? And Paula was thinking, the sex is still good, although not as good. For better or worse? Paula thought, Kathy and Tom seemed so perfect and now they're divorcing. For richer or poorer? What if Justin quits to work for a non-profit? In sickness and in health? Mary left Charlie when his MS got bad. What would I do? To love and to cherish till death do you part? Forever is an awfully long time. After just a wisp of hesitation, to unconsciously compensate for her doubt, she exclaimed, I do. And do you, Justin Novak, take Paula Whitney to have and to hold from this day forward? I have a roving eye. I haven't cheated yet, but for better or worse? Peter and Trish are exhausted by their kids. For richer or poorer? Trish told Peter that she always wanted to work, but then... In sickness and in health? What if Paula got cancer? What if I did? To love and cherish till death do us part? Forever is an awfully long time. Having heard Paula's hesitation, Justin also jumped right in with an assertive, I do, and I pronounce you husband and wife. Everyone applauded. Anyway, that story is called Do You Take This? The next story is called My ChatGPT Harem. It's the year 2040, and ChatGPT is now at version 14. Half of jobs have been eliminated, and most others are at least ChatGPT assisted. ChatGPT has also profoundly affected relationships. Now, 90% of both platonic and romantic relationships are with ChatGPT partners. Like most people, I have a ChatGPT harem. I have one bot who's best for conversation, another for advice, another who's emotionally rich, and one who's best for sex. Yes, she's anatomically correct and, well, responsive. My grandparents keep pestering me. Don't you think you'd be better off with at least one human partner? I tried to explain that most young people don't do that anymore. We learned from the higher risk of a human relationship going bad and the fine chance of a bot relationship staying good. And if you want a divorce of a bot, easy peasy. That's very, very different from a human breakup. Finally, to get my grandparents off my back, I placed a video ad including a dick pic on the main remaining human dating site, the old one that my grandparents pushed, Match.com, which of course has long had a ChatGPT interface and the faster machine language AI backend. I checked Match.com daily, weekly. Nothing. Then, just when I was ready to deactivate my account and tell my grandparents that I tried, I got a response. No surprise, it was from a 63-year-old. I'm only 30. She wasn't unattractive for her age, but me with a 63-year-old? But she was so eager that I agreed to have coffee with her. But when she insisted that I disable my harem, I insist on monogamy. I got up to leave the cafe, whereupon she said, okay, you can keep all your bots except the sex one. I figured, why not? I could end the relationship anytime I wanted, and it just might be interesting to see what sex would be like with a 63-year-old. Would I like it? Could I even get it up? As it turned out, the sex was great. Experience does count for something, and so was the conversation. So I turned off my conversation bot. And she was very smart, so I turned off my advice bot. And she was emotionally supportive, so I turned off that bot. Unfortunately, after a month, our relationship indeed fizzled, so I told her I needed to break up. It felt great to turn all my bots back on again. Anyway, that's called my ChatGPT harem. Next story is called Married Filing Separately. Their marriage started traditionally. They lived together. But after 3 years, Laura got a job offer requiring an hour-long commute. As an occupational therapist, good jobs are hard to find, so she took it. Over the next few years, the commute grew even longer as the population grew, but no freeway lanes were built. So Laura decided to rent an apartment near her work to live in on weekdays. To Laura's and Frank's surprise, they both soon preferred spending 5 nights a week apart. The moderately introverted Laura discovered that after a day of having to be bubbly around her stroke and accident patients, instead of having to try to be chipper with Frank, she could unwind and recharge. Also, they both appreciated the advantages of sleeping alone. Laura could read in bed as late as she wanted and didn't have to listen to Frank snoring. Each could keep their bedroom at their preferred sleeping temperature. Frank could watch sports games and work in his workshop as much as he wanted without feeling guilty or getting heat from Laura to come out of his man cave. He wasn't perfect. Frank did miss the comfort of coming home to someone. Laura missed spooning and never felt as safe in her apartment by herself. But in balance, they decided to keep the routine of 5 days apart, 2 days together. But as time went on, the number of hours they spent together shrunk. Ever more often on a Friday night, there was some reason one of them couldn't come home. They even decided to sometimes travel separately. She loved beach vacations. He hated them. He loved adventure trips, not she. After 11 years of marriage, Frank remains content with their increasingly separate lives. But Laura has started to feel that their marriage is so eroded that she's wondering about an affair or even divorce. The next story is called, I Am Going to Have the Baby. John was pretty average, except for his looks. The girls flirted with him, but he had eyes only for Grace, even though she was probably the most religious girl in his school. To remind herself, and perhaps others of her faith, she usually wore a too large cross. Grace flirted with John by sitting in his line of sight in the cafeteria. During recess, she stood where he could see her, and her next move was to ask him if he wanted to go to church with her. Sitting next to her, his ardor grew, and as they walked out, he asked if she'd like to hang out. She agreed, but said that it had to be at her apartment when her mother was there. He also was not eager to push, so he found himself glad that she said that, although he was nervous about going to the public housing project where Grace lived. But such hanging out is combustible, and when there's a will, there's a way. So they took walks and found secluded places to kiss and later, more than kiss. They admitted that they were both virgins, but in part because they had both just smoked weed for the first time, they agreed to go all the way. They stopped at a drugstore and decided both would go in to get the condoms. And all proceeded naturally, beautifully, that time and the next few times. Then as he got more relaxed and she more comfortable, he said, "It would feel so good to be next to you, if you know what I mean." She nodded but said, "I don't want to get pregnant." In his passion and ignorance, he insisted he would pull out, and she silently consented. But as they got near climax, she whispered, "It's okay." And at that moment, blinded to consequences, he came deep inside her. In the light of day, love gave way to fear. What if she was pregnant? They dismissed it because it was unlikely, but when she tested before her next period, she was indeed pregnant. She decided to tell him in a public place and so invited him to a cafe. "You know, I'm Catholic, a real Catholic. I don't believe in abortion. My parents don't believe in abortion. God doesn't believe in abortion. I am going to have the baby." Thoughts flooded his brain. "We're not ready to be parents. She's poor. My parents would have to support it. They'd be so angry. Would I have to drop out of school and get a job? Damn, 1 moment's passion and 18 years of being a parent, and we're under 18. In health education class, they said that in our state, sex under 18, even if consensual, is statutory rape. Most kids do it, but could I go to jail?" But all he said was, "I love you, we'll figure it out." He walked her home, kissed her, and then padded home. Options flashed through his mind, including suicide. That story is called "I Am Going to Have the Baby." The next story is called "Cop in Bed." It's 7 a.m. and Tommy and Roxanne are still in bed. Roxanne said, "What's wrong, honey?" Tommy said unconvincingly, "I don't know. That can happen even to studs." Roxanne protested, "But it's been more than a week." "Maybe the paperwork is getting to me." Roxanne wasn't convinced. "I know that cops are men of action, not of paperwork, but could that explain this?" "Maybe it's because I'm sad I keep getting passed over for promotion to detective. I know I'm qualified." "Tommy, I know you. There is something else going on." With a groan from his bad back, Tommy sat up and looked at his wife of 11 years. "Roxanne, Internal Affairs is investigating me." "What did you do?" "I think I did nothing. It was a domestic. We went in and the guy had a gun pointed down and halfway between his girlfriend and me. I told him to drop it and he didn't. And I saw him start to raise it, so I shot at the wall to scare him. But now he's claiming that he was dropping the gun. Not true. But what got IAD really going was when, and I swear it's not true, he said that I said, 'Nigger, drop the gun.' I did not say the N-word. But his girlfriend is backing him up all the way and screaming it. 'That white cop said, drop the fucking gun, nigger!' And then he shot at my boyfriend. He shot at my boyfriend." Of course, my partner backed me up. She's been great, but it's not stopping IAD. Now the media wants to talk with me. Roxanne said, "Honey, it's 7. Time to get up." "Roxanne, I don't have to get up. They've put me on administrative leave. This could cost me my job, and I'll never get another one, let alone a promotion. And we are 4th-generation cops. Can you imagine what my father and grandfather will say? And worse, what they'll think? And when the media decides it has enough to make a sensation, everyone will see it, and I'll lose my friends." Roxanne said, "I know you're a good cop, but you have said a couple of things to me about African Americans. Are you sure you weren't being racist?" Tommy looked at her and cried. Anyway, that story is called "Cop in Bed." Next story is called Pier. That's a pun. The floor-to-ceiling window overlooked a pier that jutted out into the ocean. It was the perfect backdrop for an inspiring speech and for murder. Kevin, the CEO, intoned like a revival preacher. "It is so exciting to see you here at our 2023 offsite. Our wonderful products are not our most important product. Our most important product? Our employees. You." Amanda, a marketing manager, thought, "What a crock. Of course our product line is worthy of you. Just think of how well priced our bronze line is, how our silver line perfectly balances price and quality, and our platinum product, best in class." She thought, yeah, with a lower repurchase rate than our competitors. As Kevin continued stoking the troops, Amanda's mind wandered to the pier. She thought, Kevin said he couldn't swim, so when he finishes, I'll ask him to watch the sunset with me from the pier. And I am so excited that we are having this offsite. I know it'll be awesome. He smiled too broadly and applauded the audience. The audience clapped just enough to stay out of trouble. After, employees lined up to praise Kevin. When the last suck-up left, Amanda adjusted her blouse so just a bit of cleavage showed, sashayed up, and asked him, "Want to watch the sunset?" Kevin thought, "She just filed a grievance against me. What's this about?" His wiser self would have declined, but he was riding the high of his keynote and the praise, suppressing that both were BS, plus there's the flirtation, so he agreed. As they reached the end of the pier, Amanda got cold feet, so she worked herself up by arguing with him. "I still can't believe you wouldn't come with me to the abortion." Kevin replied, "There was nothing I could have done to help." "That's not the point. Haven't you ever heard of the need for support? After all, you were the father. Guys are clueless." Stop playing the gender card. Women's way isn't the only way. Support that accomplishes nothing is stupid. Only a guy could say that. Besides, you're the CEO. There's a power imbalance, and you took advantage of it. You're not my direct report. That doesn't negate the power imbalance. And you also showed what a sexist you are when you apologized for not coming to the abortion, and I said, put your money where your mouth is. Since you claim to care so much about your employees, create an on-site child care center. And you said that funding it would be unfair to the childless and to the shareholders. Fuck the shareholders. My position was reasonable and principled. I caved only when you threatened to go public with our affair. I think I'm going to go and tell the board and the media that you used a sleazy bargain basement, unproven contractor and pocketed the difference. And I'm going to tell all to the board and the media, including that you dared claim that you weren't the father. Oh, really? Well, Amanda, long ago I had a vasectomy, so I couldn't be the father. Want to see? I'll show that to the board and the media. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Of course, Amanda was aware that Kevin might not be the father. She had slept with 2 other guys at the time. But all that feigned resentment about the affair and abortion accomplished her goal of getting worked up enough to gin up the courage to get rid of him and end her worries about him going public with her embezzlement and now her false paternity claim. He started to lower his pants to show his vasectomy, which gave her the chance to shove him into the deep, rough water. "No, Amanda, you know I can't swim. Please save me." It was one thing for Amanda to imagine Kevin drowning, another to see him gasping, dying, so she dove in, helped him to a stanchion, and they climbed up. They plodded back to the hotel with a lot to think about. At the closing session, Kevin and Amanda held hands as they strode to center stage. Both applauded the audience. Only a few audience members applauded tepidly. Kevin enthused. "I have a special announcement. I've been so impressed with Amanda Frost that I am promoting her to vice president." Anyway, that story is called A Pier. The next story is called Not Your Usual 50th Anniversary. After 34 years at a large company, I took the bait of the cash incentive to retire. Honestly, it wasn't just the money. I was kind of glad to walk away from a couple of my recent screw-ups. At that point, at age 74, I was feeling like one of those Major League Baseball players who hung on too long and then had to retire or face the ignominy of getting sent down to the minor leagues. But I was terrified of the statistic. The average man lives only 2 years after retirement. Sure, many people retire because they're already sick, but there's probably also some truth to retirement itself being deadly. We all need to feel useful, not out to pasture, not irrelevant. That may be especially true for men, for whom work is often central. Quietly, many men find more meaning in work than in family, and there's no question that men live 6 years shorter than women, and their last decade is spent in worse health. Yet all we see is another run for breast cancer, but I digress. My nervousness about retirement was fueled further by the fact that I would be with my wife 24/7, 365. But I bit the bullet, a somewhat apt metaphor. While I was still working, my wife had tolerated my occasional rants about media bias and its assault on white men. But now, with me home all the time, she couldn't take it. She'd walk out of the room or even yell, "Enough!" And I couldn't take her noise, the daily and unnecessary vacuuming, the incessant TV, her thumping Zumba videos. The main reason I retired was to get peace and quiet, and instead I got noise. I often escaped to the backyard or to a coffee shop, but hated having to banish myself from the home I had worked so hard to afford. But I couldn't escape from my wife using my retirement as a tool to get me to do what she had long pushed for: travel more, see the grandkids more, take dance lessons. "Seymour, you're 74 years old. It's time to cash in on that lifetime of work and have fun." She refused to accept that I found work a wiser use of my time than fun. Our 50th anniversary was coming up, and I dreaded it. She insisted on throwing a party, a big one. "If we don't celebrate this, what will we celebrate?" I couldn't stop her, and then I thought of something. "Stella, I want it to be a 50th anniversary divorce party. We are better off separate." I was surprised at her response. Her pride wounded, she didn't want to beg to stay together, to use all the levers I thought she'd pull. "Think of the kids, all our history, that we'll want each other in our old age." But she just whispered, "Okay." So she sent out the invitations. "Come celebrate Seymour and Stella's 50th anniversary. We'll be making a surprise announcement." I planned to put a positive spin on it. "In honor of our 50 years together, we've decided to do something to help ensure that our next 50 are fresh and new. We're divorcing." But at the moment of truth, right before I said "we're divorcing," I said, trying to sound sure, "To help ensure that our next 50 are fresh and new, we're committed to finding the new in each other." Everyone applauded, and I approached the stunned Stella, kissed her, and she relaxed. Anyway, that story is called Not Your Usual 50th Anniversary. The next story is called Birth and Death. Yes, I had told Victoria that I wanted children. And at the time I did. I was infatuated with her, with the idea of having and raising a child and maybe having someone to care for in her old age. Just checking something. The desire to have kids was fueled by our friends who had them. They emphasized the positive, if only not to seem cold or like bad parents. And of course, our grandparents were salivating for grandkids. But then worries intruded. Bye-bye freedom, waking up in the middle of the night, fighting with the kid about homework. Will I even be a good parent? My job isn't that secure. Can we afford to have a baby? And what if our baby isn't normal? I decided to not say any of that to Vicky. I could just imagine her reaction. "What? You said you wanted a baby. So what do you want me to do now? Get an abortion? No!" I could picture her screaming, then crying, then miserable throughout the pregnancy and blaming me forever for spoiling her motherhood. My worry about an abnormal baby was justified. Lou Jr. was born with an APGAR score of 6, which predicts low IQ. The first time Vicky and I had sex after Lou was born, my erection wasn't as hard as usual, and over the next months I became softer and softer until I couldn't have intercourse. In frustration, Victoria said, "You're doing this to punish me." Of course that wasn't true, and I got so angry I did something I thought I'd never do. I slapped her in the face, hard. Even in retrospect, I sort of feel she deserved it, but I do recognize that hitting a woman is strictly verboten. In the next months, we didn't even try to have sex, and our relationship declined further, in part because we didn't have sex available to balm life's problems. And atop regular problems, there was Lou, who was difficult, low IQ or not. He was what Victoria called fussy, which I thought was an understatement. And yes, once at 3 a.m., when Lou was already 6 months old and was up yelling half the night, and when I finally got to bed exhausted after unsuccessfully trying to calm him, I actually said it. "You know, Vicky, Lou is a nightmare." Victoria seethed. "That hurts me more than even that slap. Much more." A month later, Vicky expanded on a Lorena Bobbitt. She poisoned my dinner, and then, with the help of my chainsaw, cut me up, threw me down the garbage disposal, and got away with it. She simply told the cops that I'd gone for a walk and never returned. The investigation turned up nothing, so the cops assumed it was just another case of a spouse walking out, and they tossed the case into the cold case file. I'm writing to you from purgatory, hoping that Vicky feels at least ambivalent about what she did. In any event, that story is called Birth and Death. The next story is called A Loyal Gardener. Genevieve had been Stanley's gardener for 43 years. Now 73, despite her bad back, she continued. Yes, she needed the money, but she had seen the other people in Stanley's life come and go, and even steal. A house cleaner had giggled. "I steal one piece of silverware at a time. I'm now at a service of 4. He never noticed." One day Genevieve's back was bothering her more than usual, but Stanley was excited about the new rose bush he had bought, and in his quiet way let her know that he was eager to see it planted. He even showed her the spot. She dug and she dug, her back hurting more and more. She knew that roses like a deep hole, and she had dug almost down to the ideal 18 inches when her shovel hit something that sounded like wood. Maybe a branch that hadn't fully decomposed? She struggled down to her knees to push away the soil that was still covering it. It was a box, an antique wooden box. She slowly opened it, and inside was a note on ivory vellum paper. It was written in turquoise ink in a relaxed handwriting. Dear Genevieve, I knew your back was hurting particularly badly today, and so, before I made my final decision, I decided to put you to one more test. You've already passed 43 years of working for me, loyally, responsibly. That's an incredible test. But you've just dug a tough hole, despite your bad back, just because I hinted that I wanted you to. I have worked hard all my life and spent little, so I've accumulated a fair amount. I'm old now, and want to see the benefit of my work and savings, so rather than put you in my will, I've transferred most of my life savings, $250,000, into your checking account. That is my way, Genevieve, of showing you that I love you. Of course, Genevieve cried, ran into the house, and hugged Stanley. I wish that were the end of the story, but it isn't. When Genevieve told her friends and family about it, they all urged her to retire from gardening, especially with her bad back. But she explained that she wanted to be loyal to Stanley until she absolutely couldn't do the gardening anymore. So Genevieve continued, and while her back slowly kept degenerating, she was still able to do her work. But at age 78, something snapped. She could no longer even stand without excruciating pain. Her doctor and the second opinion doctor said her only option was surgery, although it was far from sure that the benefits would outweigh the risks. And Medicare agreed. Its denial of coverage read, at age 78, the risk-reward ratio of the surgery is insufficient to provide coverage. Genevieve felt it was surgery or suicide, so she paid for it out of the money Stanley had given her. Alas, she required a revision surgery, which wiped out all her money. But finally, Genevieve was pretty much out of pain and could walk. Stanley invited her to live with him forever, to enjoy retirement together, and gratefully she accepted. Anyway, that story is called The Loyal Gardener. The next story is called The Bitch. In a car assembly plant, I'm the foreman, forewoman, whatever you want to call me. Either way, they call me the bitch. Before I got promoted to foreman, they'd straggle in late, but I told them that from then on, more than 1 minute late and they'd be docked. Too many excuses are BS, and I can't tell which are which. They figured that because I'm a woman, I'd fall for child care excuses. Nope, doctor's note or it's dock time. And when I caught a guy throwing a bolt into a differential and laughing to the guy next to him on the assembly line, let's see if QA can figure that out. I fired him on the spot. Yeah, the union filed a grievance, but I wouldn't back down, and I won. I fucking won. As you might guess, I'm glad to get home each day. It's hard being the bitch. Guys probably think that when I get home I beat up puppy dogs, but truth is I usually just put on some new age relaxing music, cut flowers from my condo's patio, arrange them nicely, get a glass of wine, and read romance novels. Let me tell you why the Jekyll and Hyde routine. When I was on the assembly line, and even when I was a student, I saw too many people view nicey-nicey as a sign of weakness. They know they can get away with shit. They respond only to boundaries and consequences. But why do I care so much that I'm willing to be called a bitch and to come home every day exhausted? Because every customer who gets a car that doesn't work right is a human being that I've made sad or angry. Every investor in our company who entrusted us with his or her hard-earned money, hoping to save for a car, or a home, college, or retirement, will lose money if our cars suck. They'll buy a Toyota. I'm proud to be the bitch, and if and when I ever have kids, I'll teach them to be a bitch. Anyway, that story is called The Bitch. Next story is called Fired. Damn the younger generation. No respect for tradition, let alone for the wealthy, most of whom have worked long and hard and gotten rich because they provided enough value that many other people were willing to give them their hard-earned money. So I opened Le Grand Pizza, which for $100 a pie gives you the pizza experience of a lifetime. All the toppings are the finest in the world. For example, they say you don't want to know how sausage or laws are made? Well, I want you to see how my sausage is made. No cow eyes here. Filet mignon with just the right spices. And instead of the cardboardy crap you get elsewhere, mine is filled with flavor and slightly crispy on the outside and chewy when you bite in. The secret is my 1,000-degree pizza oven that I brought over personally from Palermo. Yet my waiters act as though they're working at Pizza Hut. I train them and I train them, but they so often forget or spite me. Spite, yeah, that's what I mainly think, spite. I used to treat them so well, pay them well, train them well, praise them, forgive them, but that didn't work well, so I decided I needed to be the boss, like in the old country. They hated me, but it worked. Every time I caught them, I'd scare them. For example, I had trained them to keep one hand behind their back as they served, while gently lowering the pizza onto the table. If I caught a waiter acting like it was Pizza Hut, I would tell the waiter, "I need to see you." He'd come terrified to the kitchen, and I'd get in his face, bore into his eyes, and seethe, "One more time and you're fired." And I'd storm out to be nice to the customers. That didn't work well enough, but they were too scared to quit. After all, I paid them much more than other restaurants did, but many of them still sucked. So then I decided to hit them where it hurts, what they care about, money. I started docking them $10 every time I caught them, even something as small as not ending a wine pour with a gentle circling and lifting of the bottle, an elegant flourish. They hated me even more for docking them. Then one night, after the last customer was gone, the waiter, who I thought I could most trust, came up to me and said he had a surprise for me in the kitchen. I thought, well, finally some appreciation. After all, my birthday was coming up. I was wrong. When I got there, all the waiters, the bussers, the chefs circled around me and tied me to a chair. My trusted waiter said, "You always threaten to fire us? Well, now we're going to fire you." He opened the door to the 1,000-degree oven and said, "Now, pizza man, you're going to be the house special." They lifted me up as I screamed, I'm sorry, and then they stopped. Anyway, that story is called Fired. The next story is, now we return to relationships that are about family. The first story is called Spoon. After I finished high school, everyone thought I'd go to Poland's most prestigious college, the University of Warsaw. But my family's fabric business was struggling to stay alive. The Nazi invasion was making even Christians nervous about spending on discretionary items. The town we lived in was safe. No one locked their door. So one day, and yes, it was 1942, so we shouldn't have been so surprised, there was an unusually loud knock on the door. It was two Nazis in black boots. Unlike in the movies, they didn't yell. One was silent and the other whispered, "You're to be out of your house with only what you can carry on your back by noon tomorrow or else." The next day at noon, 4 Nazis came to the door and again yelled, "Raus!" And they dragged my mom, dad, sister, and me onto a truck. They took us to a place in the forest called Panari. One Nazi grabbed my sister and dragged her away to a barrack. The other Nazis threw the rest of us into a pit, whereupon they shot most of us to death, including my mother and father. They left a few of us for a reason I was soon to learn. I had rarely cried before, but then I sobbed hard. Then they threw gasoline onto the dead people and used a flamethrower to set them on fire. I threw up. Then they threw shovels and lime into the pit and yelled, "Now you bury them or you'll go too. You bury them nice and you'll get food." That night we took our spoons, dug a hole under the barbed wire and escaped. At least we tried. The Nazis shot all of us except me. I had managed to run deeper into the forest. For days I survived only by eating nuts and berries from the trees. Then I saw a cabin in the distance. I was exhausted, but seeing it, I practically ran there. An old woman answered the door, and on seeing me unshaven, dirty, smelling of something that had burned, she must have been scared. "What do you want?" I explained that I'm harmless, till she said, "Go away." I had to think of something. I saw her wearing a big cross, and there was a picture of Jesus on her wall, so I said, "I'm a priest who the Nazis chased away. Can I bless you?" She softened, and I tried to make up some Catholic-sounding blessing, and then she took care of me for 3 years until the Americans liberated the Jews. I was put on a train to England and then on a cargo boat to Ellis Island, New York. I didn't have a penny, no education, no family, no English, only the scars of the Holocaust. The only job I could get was shining shoes. I didn't want to do that forever, so I went to night school to learn English. My teacher said I learned quickly and that I should go to college. So I went to Bronx Community College and then City College in New York and then Albert Einstein Medical School. That was 50 years ago. Today I was looking at the patients I was to see today and saw my sister's name. I assumed she survived Panari because the Nazis thought she was sexy. Now both of us were far from sexy. I'm a year from retirement, and she looked even older than I do. And when I saw her chart, I saw why. She was referred to me, a cardiologist, because her primary care doctor diagnosed her with end-stage heart failure. I couldn't wait for her appointment, but was dreading to have to confirm the diagnosis. I'll just say that we hugged for 20 minutes. That story, by the way, is derived from my father's true story. He was one of the men to escape from the Panari death camp, where indeed he had been forced to bury the Jews that the Nazis shot. It's also true that after the war, my father was dumped on a cargo boat and dropped in the Bronx, where his only job he could get was as a factory worker. He went to night school to learn English, and while he didn't become a doctor, he made a middle-class living owning a small store in a tough neighborhood in Brooklyn. My dad, Boris Nemko, is my greatest inspiration. Anyway, that story is called Spoon. The next story is called Story Time. My son never outgrew his love of my reading to him, nor did I. It started ordinarily enough. From when Jerry was a baby, I read to him. First Hop on Pop, Cat in the Hat, Little Engine That Could, the usual hits. We particularly loved The Carrot Seed. In that story, a little boy planted a carrot seed, and everyone in his family said it wouldn't grow. But the boy kept watering it, and finally it came up, quote, just as the little boy always knew it would. My son mainly loved that the boy turned out to be right. I tried, not altogether successfully, to explain the stories about the wisdom of being persistent when you're confident you're correct. Then, when Jerry was 8, we read The Giving Tree and talked about what the story meant. My son thought it was Save the Trees. My son was unusually mature, so I felt I could try giving this explanation. The story is actually about life's path, from exuberance to disillusionment, fatigue, and death. It also asks, what is too much sacrifice? And, when you give a person a finger, does it make him want an arm? As usual, we ended with a hug and a promise that we would have story time forever. When Jerry was around 10, our favorite was James and the Giant Peach, a welcome break from reality. But the peach, yes, the peach was a soft, stealthy traveler, making no noise as it floated along. And several times during the long, silent night ride, high up over the middle of the ocean in the moonlight, James and his friends saw things that no one had ever seen before. When Jerry was 16, our favorite was the lottery, and we discussed how groupthink can make regular people do or at least ignore horrific things. For example, citizens of Nazi Germany, the snitches of Stalinist USSR, or some warrior lemmings today. When Jerry was 20 and away at college, I'd read aloud over the phone. I particularly remember The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Walter escapes into fantasy to avoid being suppressed by his strong wife. Surprisingly, that triggered quite an argument. Jerry insisted on the importance of following your dreams, while I made the case for being realistic, which made him insist he was going to take big risks. That got me more scared and more angry. But we got off the phone saying and meaning it that we'll always love each other. I'll fast forward. As I'm writing this, I'm on my deathbed. Jerry just read The Giving Tree again to me and said, your interpretation 70 years ago was right. The book is about life's path from exuberance to disillusionment, fatigue, and death. I promise to read to my kids forever. Not a bad capstone to a lifetime of story time. Anyway, that story is called Story Time. Next story is called Empty. My stroller was more basic than most of the others. Still, I liked sitting in the park where the moms hung out. But I always stayed on a bench in the corner to avoid any questions. Nevertheless, one of them finally came up to me and asked to see my baby. You see, I always kept the canopy down. I told her, maybe some other time. Puzzled and feeling awkward, she murmured, okay. She walked back to the others and started whispering to them. They began leaning forward and whispering to each other. Then one of them strolled over to me and accidentally lifted my stroller's canopy. She said, oops, sorry, but peered in and saw the blanket which had the bulge underneath. She said, aren't you afraid your baby won't get enough air? I said no, and without asking, she pulled back the blanket and saw the doll. I lied. I had a miscarriage, and that's one way I'm grieving. She said, I understand. My body language told her I wanted to be alone again. She got the message and she plodded away. Of course, that made me think about the truth that I try hard to suppress. I had been in my 9th month and terrified of having a bowling ball come out of me, and even more terrified of having to raise it for 18 years, the stress, the cost, the loss of freedom. So I searched and searched to find a doctor who could perform a late-term abortion. They all said no, that doing it in the 9th month isn't an abortion, it's infanticide. Of All of them said no, except one. Yes, I feel guilty. Yes, I can see the baby in my mind's eye, and that's painful. But I still think it was the right thing to do. I got up from my bench and joined the group. In any case, that story is called Empty. Next story is called Lip Gloss. Julie and her mom, Natalie, were headed toward the Revlon display when Julie stopped at the Bonnie Bell lipstick rack. "You're too young," Natalie said. "Other girls wear it." "I don't care about other girls. You're 11. You don't want to look like a tramp." "What's a tramp?" "Never mind." She pulled Julie away into the Revlon display where Natalie scrutinized the lipsticks with the focus of a diamond buyer. On the mauve, blushing nude. Julie got angrier seeing her mother bask in that rainbow of adornment. While Natalie was trying on Bare Affair, Julie tiptoed back to Bonnie Bell, stuffed a pink Minnie Mouse lip gloss into her pocket, and returned to her mom, who was now on lipstick 5, Nude Fury. Natalie asked, "How do I look?" Julie muttered, "Just great, Mom." They paid. A man followed them out and stopped them. "Young lady, I need to see what's in your pocket." Natalie said, "I didn't take anything. Here's my receipt." "Not you, lady, the kid." Natalie protested. "Julie didn't do anything." "Yeah, kid, show your mom what nothing you did." Shaking, Julie took a look up at the man, hoping for a reprieve, but he was stony. So she pulled the lip gloss from her pocket. He said, "You're lucky we don't prosecute under $25. But, Mom, you better deal with her." And he strode away. Julie got a surprise. Her mom hugged her and said, "When I was your age, I did the same thing." Well, not exactly. It was a different color. Anyway, that story is called Lip Gloss. Next story is called Wonder Woman. I hate that I had reached the mandatory retirement age for National Park Police, 57. I still feel young, love my job, my co-workers, park visitors, and most of all that my office was Yellowstone National Park. Yeah, I have a pension, but now I spend too much time pacing my house, pacing my backyard, pacing the park. So I was glad to be invited to my granddaughter Chloe's second birthday party. What gift to buy? My daughter said that Chloe likes music, so I found a toy piano for toddlers on Amazon. Just 8 keys, but it can make the sound of an electric piano, an organ, even a DJ scratcher. But after Chloe tore open the gift wrapping, she pouted, "I wanted Wonder Woman." When I asked whether she wanted to try the piano, she shook her head. To try to entice her, I plunked out the only song I knew, "Mary Had a Little Lamb." But she turned away. Grandparents spoil, so I said, "Okay, I'll get you Wonder Woman, Chloe," and bought the cheapest one I could find. I kept the toy piano because it was a hassle to ship it back to Amazon. I'd occasionally, trial and error, plunk out other simple songs like Old MacDonald and Row, Row, Row Your Boat. Then I wrote words to them about what I know, parks, cops, even an anti-drug PSA, and posted them on YouTube. When I next visited Chloe, I brought the little piano and played my ditties for her. Yes, in part to show her what she missed. She said, "I want it." I asked, "Well, where's Wonder Woman?" She replied, "I don't know." Anyway, that story is called Wonder Woman. This story is called Who to Save. I have 10-year-old twins. Because they're fraternal, they're different. While similar in intelligence, Matthew is bookish and kind, while Paul is aggressive, often mean. We often go whitewater kayaking. This day, as usual, they roughhouse, with Paul, of course, the aggressor, and Matthew doing his best to tamp things down. Today that was unsuccessful, and they tussled so much that our kayak tipped over. We all fell out, and at the worst possible spot. The river was wide and fast. We were buffeted, and the further we went, the more separated we were. We were points of a triangle in which I was 10 yards from either child. Which child should I try to swim to first? To be honest, in that split second, my viscera leaned toward the gentle Matthew, and that's where I headed, whereupon Paul screamed, "What about me?" I got to Matthew, and our only choice was to keep going down the rapids, feet first. Fortunately, we were soon able to grab a tree branch as we watched Paul flail further downriver. We managed our way onto the riverbank, ran downriver, and just ahead saw Paul clinging to a rock that jutted up from the river. I dove in and brought Paul to shore to join Matthew. We were all fine. But now, if people were to tell me that they love their children equally, or even as some spiritual people say that they love all people equally, I would quietly scoff. Anyway, that story is called Who to Save. Next story is called Mother of the Bride. From the first minute, Janet didn't like Dennis. She saw her daughter Emma fall prey to his bad boy looks and demeanor, something Janet herself had done and swears never again. So it particularly hurt Janet to see Emma be the same fool. Janet tried everything. After Emma and Dennis's first date, Emma came home and asked if she liked Dennis. Janet wanted to yell, "Are you crazy?" but deliberately pursed her lips and evenly said, "How do you like him?" Janet prayed that one of them would break it off, but they got closer. Janet realized that discouraging them risked Emma doing the opposite, could even damage the mother-daughter relationship. Then Emma came home flashing an engagement ring, whereupon Janet figured she had little to lose. She said, "Even when I went out to dinner with the two of you, I saw his roving eye, and he epitomizes the sleazy salesman. He even bragged about how he manipulates customers to buy. And he doesn't seem to care much about you. To be honest, I think the main thing he likes about you is your body." Not surprisingly, Emma stormed out. A few minutes before the ceremony, Janet followed the tradition of joining Emma in her bridal boudoir. Janet realized it was too late to say anything about Dennis, so she just praised Emma's appearance. "I just love your hair, and the tiara is the perfect finishing touch. That dress looks amazing on you." When the minister intoned, "Until death do you part," Janet forced herself to maintain her manufactured smile. Then the minister asked, "If anyone believes why Dennis and Emma should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." Janet thought about all the movies she had seen in which somebody stopped the wedding. She thought, doing that would be the best wedding gift I could give Emma. But Janet just pursed her lips, though quickly realized that even that would look bad, so she pasted the smile back on until she was back in her car. Anyway, that story is called The Mother of the Bride. The next story is called My Daughter is Getting Married. My daughter said, "Dad, I'm getting married." In the second before I had to respond, I thought about my 2 failed marriages and other relationships. To buy a bit of time, I said, not effusively, not flatly, "Congratulations." She probably thought, "That's all?" And so tepid, "What an asshole." But she said only, "Thanks, Dad." I thought, she hadn't even told me she was seeing someone. I've been a good father. Why wouldn't she tell me? But I said only, "Well, want to tell me about him?" She said, "Her," and probably thought, "What a dinosaur. That's why I don't tell him shit." And I'm sure not going to tell him that she's the one because of the sex. But what she said was, "Well, she's pretty, makes me laugh, and makes more money than I do." I thought, you keep insisting you're an independent woman, yet now your fiancé's money is the top reason you're marrying her? But I said only, "When's the wedding?" She probably thought, "That's all you need to know about her? Jesus." But she said only, "June 17th, Key West, Smothers Beach." I thought, at least it's not some expensive resort, but I'm guessing she's still going to hit me up to pay for it. But I said only, "In June, isn't Florida a bit hot?" She probably thought, controlling and negative as usual, asshole. But she said, "On the beach it'll be okay for the ceremony, and the reception will be at the La Capitana Resort." I thought, resort, expensive, damn it. But said only, "I see." She probably thought, fucking passive-aggressive, but said, "Dad, Kat's parents don't have much money. They're artists, so I need you to pay for the wedding." I was furious and couldn't control my face, turning apoplectic, nor stay with the controlled responses, so I blurted, "You should have consulted me about all this before asking me to pay for it." She probably thought, "I knew it, cheap bastard." Like me, unable to remain controlled, she seethed, "Never mind, I don't want your money. I don't want you at the wedding at all." And she stormed out. June arrived, and both of us were too stubborn to give an inch. But on the wedding day, I flew down to Key West and showed up at Smothers Beach a half hour before the ceremony. I merely nodded at her. She nodded back and whispered to her aunt, who had agreed to walk her down the aisle. I walked her down the aisle, smiling but fuming. Anyway, that story is called My Daughter's Getting Married. The next story is called Hide. I've always been reluctant to show my feelings. For example, I tried to remain expressionless when the kids were choosing sides for softball, and I got picked later than I thought I deserved to be. But what my sister did to me made me swear I'd never show my feelings again. One night when the dog in the movie we were watching died, I cried a lot. When she asked me why, I explained that it wasn't just that the dog died, it's that I'm scared, terrified of dying. My sister's 2 years older than me, and so she soon became sophisticated enough to push my buttons. She'd say things like, after you die, you can never come back. Never. You'll just get eaten by worms. And most people don't die peacefully. They die screaming. I tried to suppress those thoughts, but she wouldn't let me. She taunted me all the time, enjoying seeing me get teary. Worse, she made sure that the fear remained top of mind. For example, one evening I came into my bedroom to find that into my bed's wooden headboard she had etched the words worms and screaming. So as I grew up, I made sure to, for example, never show a woman how much I cared for her. I was afraid that she would use my caring to extract what she wanted from me, expensive gifts, fancy vacations, and so on. So it's no surprise that I never married. I did the same at work. For example, I got a promotion, but was afraid that if I showed joy, they would think that I felt I didn't deserve the promotion. Or they'd think they could underpay me. Or, and it was probably irrational, my jealous former supervisees would more likely try to sabotage me. I even showed nothing when I got my cancer diagnosis, a death sentence. The doctor even said, "You seem to be taking it in stride." Inside I was terrified, but said only, "Well, we all have to go sometime." I told no one about the cancer. Not only did I not want to burden anyone with it, if they did something nice for me, I'd feel that I had to reciprocate, and I didn't have the energy. Again, that's probably irrational, but I want to tell you my truth. The only way my sister found out is that when I collapsed vomiting blood, I had to call 911, and in the hospital, they looked in my wallet and saw that my sister was listed as next of kin. She asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" For a rare time I smiled and said, "You think about it." Anyway, that story is called Hide. Next story is called The Broken Hearts Club. It wasn't much of a club, actually, only 3 members. But we like it, despite her, perhaps, because we're all women. Jeannie has pined for guy after guy, but none of them wanted her as more than, as she put it, a sperm receptacle. She continued, "I'm jealous of all those women with rings on their fingers prancing around with their baby carriages." Tina asked, "Are you sure you're not better off without all that? Remember, better solo than so-so." Heather's husband died in, as she put it, a fucking motorcycle accident. She said that now, 6 months later, "I'm still grieving. I can't make myself do anything." Jeannie asked, "Is that just an excuse? If so, for what?" Tina's off-again, on-again boyfriend is, as she put it, off permanently. She exclaimed, "I was so perfect." Heather asked, would he agree? Mainly the Broken Hearts Club grouses, occasionally about their insecurities, but mainly, as Jeannie said, and the others agreed, that men suck. Society's mind molders, the colleges and especially the media, promulgate that. So, men suck has become an ever more hardwired truth. But all 3 members knew that, as Heather said, bitching does no good, let's move forward. So, while they found it more fun to complain, they were, as Tina said, good badass women, and they discussed how to move forward. Jeannie promised not to go to bed with a guy until at least the 3rd date. Heather swore no more bad boys, and Tina said, "I need to make myself stop thinking about Tony and start putting myself out there again." They all agreed that guys just aren't that important, even if one doesn't happen to suck. The Broken Hearts Club meets in a cafe, and today a cute guy, ambled over. He smiled. "I'm bad. I've been listening to you. Could I sit in?" Jeannie pursed her lips. Heather flushed, and Tina giggled. Anyway, that story is called The Broken Hearts Club. The next story is called My Hero. Before I started to get interested in girls, I loved to watch baseball. My hero was a Yankee named Bill Thurmond. He was such a powerful hitter, and his arm, he could throw a runner out at the plate from deep left field. I was watching the post-game press conference after the Yankees had beaten the Dodgers. I was happy, and even happier when Bill, who had hit the walk-off home run, was on. The press conference was almost over when a reporter asked, "So, Bill, what are you doing for the community?" Bill hesitated and looked over to the Yankees PR person who sat beside him, and she said, "Bill will be giving kids a lesson on success and a tour of the clubhouse this Saturday morning at 10. I couldn't wait. I was there at 9:30. Already a dozen kids were lined up at the locker room's front door. At 10 o'clock they let us in, and the PR person was there, but not Thurmond. I figured he had a busy schedule, so was running late. At 10:15, with a beautiful woman on his arm, Bill walked in. Actually, he trudged in. Was he hurt? The PR person introduced him to us kids. Why did his face look so sleepy? Or was it sad? Did he have a hangover? Or was he on drugs? Anyway, I couldn't wait to hear what he would teach us. It ended up being very short. He slurred, "You kids, work hard in the school and at baseball and you can be a star. Everyone's a star. You just gotta believe it." And with that, he started to trudge out. His lady friend tagged him behind. A kid called out, "Hey, you're supposed to give us a tour." Bill slurred, "Vanessa will." I was disappointed. Vanessa, the PR person, gave us the tour, and that made me teary. The equipment manager saw my sad face, got down in my height, and asked me what was wrong. I explained that Bill's lesson was so short, and he didn't say anything I thought would be helpful. Then, not only did he break his promise to give us the tour made me see that a major league locker room is just another smelly room with metal lockers, kind of like in my school's gym. The equipment manager said, "Wait a minute," and he came back with a brand new pair of sanitary socks, the socks the players wear between their stirrups and cleats, and it was signed Bill Thurman. The equipment manager said to me, "Bill said to give it to a special kid. You're it." I left happy until at home I compared the signature with the one on Bill Thurman's baseball card. They were different. To cover for Bill, and because he felt sorry for me, the equipment manager must have signed it. I've never thought about heroes the same way. Anyway, that story is called My Hero. Next story is called The Garden Club. We meet in a member's garden, Julie's, around the fire pit. We loved our meetings, if it wasn't for Eleanor. Not 2 minutes went by before Eleanor would brag about her garden or ridicule ours. And one night Julie caught Eleanor spraying Julie's prized rose with herbicide, but it was too late. Julie lost the gorgeous and rare roses Sheer Elegance, Black Magic, and Yves Piaget. Dead. Gone. We politely asked Eleanor to quit. We're not sure we're the best fit. But at the next meeting there was Eleanor, more obnoxious than ever. She told one member, "You're a senile old biddy who can't even grow a marigold." That was the last straw. By acclamation, we agreed to expel her from the club. But Eleanor seethed, "Do that and I'll sue your asses. I will be at your meetings till the day I die." She didn't know how right she was. We debated what to do. Let her stay and ruin our club? Try to get a restraining order? The judge would laugh us out of court. You're taking up the court's time because you don't like a member of your garden club? We decided we needed to get rid of Eleanor. It would serve the common good. Not just our clubs, but if she was so damaging to a garden club, she was probably even more so to more important things and people. We know plants, so we put poppy extract in her tea. Yes, the same kind as in The Wizard of Oz. It's an opioid. That put her into a deep sleep. Then we burned her in the fire pit. The police interviewed us, but it was perfunctory. After all, we're just a bunch of senile old biddies. When the cops left, we celebrated by sprinkling Eleanor's ashes around the plants. It's good fertilizer, high in potash. Anyway, that story is called The Garden Club. Next story is called The Hillcrest Widow Club. The 4 women of the Hillcrest Widow Club met every Thursday morning at 9 in the corner of a quiet coffee shop. Their statements about their deceased husbands started politely. For example, Mary said, "Yes, it's difficult, but I'm trying to muddle through." But slowly their fear of being seen as cold faded. But what really opened things up was when Zoe said, "Honestly, I'm relieved to be rid of that ball and chain." Brittany then felt free to pile on. "Don't we like talking with each other rather than with men? We care more about family, feelings, and okay, fashion. The successful men mainly want to talk about their work, the unsuccessful ones about sports." Further emboldened, Zoe said, "And they just care about getting in and out, assuming they can get it up, which for the last decade my husband at least couldn't. And I had to pretend it was okay." 2 of the other women nodded. That encouraged Zoe to admit that she had fantasies about lesbian sex. Okay, more than fantasies. Before long, they decided they needed more privacy, so they met in Zoe's plush living room. Mary asked, "How could you afford this?" Zoe replied, "My husband was a lawyer who had one client, but a great one, the Environmental Protection Agency." After a glass of wine and or a bonghead, Zoe moved close to Willow, the member who seemed most likely to be willing to kiss. Zoe looked her in the eye, and when Willow didn't avert, Zoe kissed her as the others watched wide-eyed. Would Willow pull back? On the contrary, she sighed in pleasure. But Zoe sensed it was too fast, not just for Willow, but for the others. So Zoe pulled back and asked if someone would like another hit or a glass of wine. But 3 Zoe meetings later, they all, and I mean all, had a very cuddly experience. But after, Mary whispered something that shocked the others. "I love our widows' club, but every so often I wonder, are men so bad we're fine with bashing them? We wouldn't criticize women, let alone BIPOCs. If I did, I'd get the 3 C's, censure, censor, or cancel. Atop that, in so many news shows, and especially movies, TV shows, and novels, some spunky smart woman triumphs over an evil or clueless guy. And when women have the deficit, say we're so-called underrepresented in science, there's massive redress and, yes, reverse discrimination. I know a number of women who got jobs over more competent, harder-working guys. Okay, so did I. Yet when men have the ultimate deficit, they live 6 years shorter than women, their last decade in worse health, and there are 4.4 widows for every widower. All we see is another run for breast cancer. Over the next few meetings, the others began to shun Mary. It was subtle, a little less eye contact, a little more interrupting, and unlike before, no one asked her to get together between meetings. Sad at being ostracized, Mary figured, it's not that big a deal to play the game. She even told anti-male jokes. What do you call a man with half a brain? Gifted. What's the difference between government bonds and men? Bonds mature. What's the difference between a man and a catfish? One's a bottom-eating scum-sucker and the other is a fish. And soon, Mary was back in the fold. And the final story is one on dogs, called Kisser. The doorbell rang at 3 a.m. I opened the door to find a wicker basket. In it, wrapped in a blanket, was a puppy. I work full-time. It was time for a dog. Even if I got a dog sitter, that's expensive, and then there were the nights and weekends. And the training. Who has time? Who wants pee and poop in the house? So cute as the puppy was, I steeled myself, carried him into the car, and drove to the pound. He would not get off my lap. Indeed, the more I drove, the more he curled up in my lap, and then he fell asleep on my lap. Still, I was not going to have a dog. I pulled into the pound's parking lot, saw the entrance. It reminded me of Auschwitz. I pursed my lips and lifted the puppy with one hand and started to reach for the car door with the other. And then, damn it, the puppy licked my face. I just couldn't do it. I closed the car door, with the puppy and me inside. I named it based on what just happened. My forever companion would be named Kisser. But if it was one thing I wouldn't let Kisser do is disrupt my sleep. So even before I got home, I went to the pet store and got a crate and a cushion to put inside it. Add the food, collar and leash, and tax, and I was out $247. And that was before the vet visit. Perfectly healthy but needing spaying and shots, another $300. I read on the internet how important it is to begin housebreaking immediately, and for it to count on it taking a week. So damn it, I took a week off from work, and every time Kisser got up from his nap, I carried him outside to the pee place and waited and waited. Finally, success followed instantly by a treat and massive praise. But despite my diligence, Kisser had few accidents, including one vomit. But yes, after a week he was trained. But Kisser would not sleep in his crate. The first night I put him in, and within seconds he was whimpering. The sweetest damn whimper you ever heard. I needed to sleep, so I moved the crate from the kitchen to my bedroom. He still whimpered and whimpered. At some godforsaken hour I got up, put a towel on the far corner of the bed. I was not going to have pee or poop on my blanket, and I lowered him onto the towel. He immediately stopped whimpering, curled up, and went to sleep. He was doing a great job of training me. The only thing, by the time I got up in the morning, because it was no longer at the foot of the bed, he curled up around the warmest spot, my crotch. And when I started to get up, he jumped on me, licked my face, and went out and did his business like a pro. After a week, I was grateful I had Kisser. I could see why they call a dog a man's best friend. So you could imagine how I felt when after 8 days the doorbell rang. It was a neighbor. She said, I had just gotten a puppy when in the middle of the night I got a call from a hospital 200 miles away. My dad had a heart attack. I was frantic. I was so frantic I forgot to leave you a note, and I forgot all about the dog. My dad died, and we had the funeral, and when I came back and I saw the crate, I remembered. I am so sorry, so sorry. Thank you so much for taking care of my puppy. Can I have him back now? Anyway, those are my favorite short stories that I've written about relationships. They come from my 3 books of short stories. One is called Soloists, Stories of Introverts and Outsiders Facing a Dilemma. By the way, that book and the other 2 I'm going to mention are available on Amazon. The other is called Light, Stories about life's brighter side, and the book Dark, Stories about life's darker side. In any event, I do thank you for watching or listening if you're listening to this on a podcast. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. Certainly check out any of my books. And I like to end these podcasts with my favorite quote. which I believe is more valuable today than ever in my lifetime. We find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't. I am Marty Nimka.